Good morning. This morning, I'm going to give you a small glance into my confession of faith, Journey with God. In preparation for this talk, I asked Pastor, where should I begin? Just as only he can say when he wants you to figure something out for yourself. He just looked at me. So I asked if I could start at the beginning, and his answer was, sure. So my beginning is about 83 years ago. I was probably a few hours old, less than a day. My mother was recovering from giving birth. In walks the nurse carrying a baby. She says to my mother, "Feed your baby." My mother said to the nurse, "That is not my baby." The nurse said, "Mother, feed your baby," and walked away. When she returned, the baby was screaming and yelling and balled up. And she said, "Mother, did you feed your baby?" My mother said to her, "I told you that was not my baby." The woman looked at her. She left. She came back with a blonde, blue-eyed child, which my mother accepted as hers. Okay, finally, Psalms 22, verse 9 through 11. "Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust even in my mother's breast. From birth I cast upon you my mother's womb, which you have been my God. From birth I was cast upon you. From my mother's womb you have been my God." During my formative years, my family attended Grant Memorial AME Church on the south side of Chicago, where my mother attended for over 70 years. My siblings and I did all the activities that were with the African American Episcopal Church. When my family moved to Hyde Park, we were welcomed by a group of evangelists from Augustana Lutheran Church, which was just across the street. As the evangelists explained the programs to my parents, they found that there were none for me, as I was the eldest. So my siblings were able to be included in the offerings of Augustana. Reaching young adulthood, I was able to go through the rite of confirmation, which included my baptism in the Lutheran Church by Pastor Philip Anderson. While attending college, I met and married my husband, Harry Wallace. After our second wedding anniversary, we were blessed with the birth of our first child, Lauren, and then our second child, Karen. Now, I want to explain something to you. About 50 years ago, there were no regulations for seatbelts or child restraining devices. On a beautiful Palm Sunday morning after attending church services, my sister and I decided to take our children out for a treat of ice cream. When we left that event, I was driving home on the Dan Ryan Expressway. As I approached 63rd Street, a car cut me off. I swerved to avoid hitting the concrete abutment that held the elevated tracks. In doing this, in my swerving, I went across all of the local lanes, hit the guardrail, continued flying through the air, where I came upon to rest by the L tracks. When I woke up in the hospital, all I could ask for was where were my children. As my baby had been on the front seat and the passenger side, my older daughter on the back seat. No one at the hospital would or could tell me where my children were. When my husband arrived, he was working that Sunday as a Chicago policeman. I asked him, "Where are the kids?" He said, "Barbara, don't worry, they're fine." I did not know at the time that a couple had seen the accident. They had stopped, took my children and my purse, and brought them to the hospital. Now, can you explain that? God put that couple in the right place at the right time to care for my children when I could not. When it was time for Lauren to attend kindergarten, we transferred our membership to Timothy Lutheran Church. Karen and Lauren both attended classes in elementary school, and they were confirmed and Lauren was baptized at Augustana. Karen was baptized at Timothy Lutheran. My children took part in all of the events that were there, as my husband was a trustee and the president of AAL. When my children were reaching their young adulthood, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. After many consultations with my medical team, it was decided that the tumor should be removed for my best quality of life. I knew this to be true because my sister had died 20 years before with the same type of brain tumor in the same space. So I was in the hospital reading my portals of prayer when I came across a passage that said, "If you put your hand in the hand of God, nothing will be impossible to you." At that moment, it seemed as though all of my burdens and worries were lifted, and I could do this. The next morning early, Pastor Kruger came in and said, "Barbara, I would like to pray for you." I said, "You don't have to do that. It's taken care of. God is going to be with me, and he's going to see me through." He said, "Well, will you take communion?" I said, "Sure, we can do that." So as you can see, I'm still here. God was in that. God has always been with me. He walks with me, he talks with me, and he leads me on. As many of you know, I have 3 granddaughters, which I'm most proud of. Alexandria is my oldest. Alex was about 3 or 4 years old. My mother and I were shopping with her. As a toddler, she wanted to do things for herself. What are you gonna do? You're gonna let her do them, right? Okay. Alex wanted to ride on the back of the grocery cart. Not in the seat for the child, not in the basket where she probably belonged, but on that handlebar she held on. My mom and I stopped to look at something, and all of a sudden, Alex started screaming. We turned around. Alex was caught between the handlebars and the basket. Now you have to remember, this is the early 2000s. Cell phones weren't used by everybody. My mom and I are standing there yelling, "Help, help, help. Will somebody call 911? I guess they did, but as we were waiting, out of my peripheral vision, I saw a figure. Was it God? Was it an angel? I didn't know. But all of a sudden, that person bent down, grabbed Alex's legs, I think, and shoved her straight up, where immediately she stopped crying. Who was it? What are we to believe? We had to believe it had to be God at that moment, stepping in to help my grandchild. As I said, I have 3 granddaughters, the last of which is Alana. Well, as we were preparing Alana, because my daughter has been very fortunate Then when she had children, she was able to stay home for 4 months, and then their dad could stay home too. After that time, at 6 months, I got them. Very proud and glad to have them. Alana is going through potty training. We said, Alana, if you go potty, you can go to school. That worked. And she was 3, and she's ready to go to school. She's ready to take that next step. She turns around and tells my husband, who had retired at the time, Papa, I not go potty. I not go to school. She stopped. Would not go. We wondered why. Why is she doing this? So at 4, she was ready to attend school with her sisters. That day, with the new rolling backpack, because we thought that was going to help her get to school, new lunchbox, she walks into St. Paul Oak Lawn Lutheran Church and School. She bypassed the preschool room, where the teacher said, Alana, come, sit down. We have a spot for you on the rug. Alana ignored her, walked with Ariana to the 2nd grade classroom. There, the teacher said the same thing. Alana, you belong in the preschool room. She put her out, or Alana walked out. But she went into chapel, stayed for the opening services, and once they were over, she marched right out of that building to the parking lot, to the car. My daughter brought her home. Alana, why are you here? She didn't say a word. She went and sat with her grandfather, my husband. She spent the afternoon with him. 3 days later, my husband died. Today would have been his anniversary for death. I tell people, anybody who will listen, God was preparing me for this journey of widowhood. He knew that I would need Alana. He knew that in order to make this journey, I had to have Alana to give me the strength to go on. So I tell you, I will forever be grateful that He has led me and guided me along this way. I've only given you a small portion of the many, many blessings that I have received on this faith journey with God. But most of all, God has kept me in His hand, and I am humbled and truly grateful for His grace, and I will sing His praises forever. Amen.